Lux Occult is part of the Green Mushroom Podcast Network.
I call upon the lady as Praxidise. Hear this, the prayer of your servant. Come quickly to me, mistress. May my words be as honey and oil, that they might be quick and subtle, flavored by my gratitude. Striding across the heavens, over land and through churning seas, you are the fulcrum upon which the levers of magic turn, the axis of the wheel of the cosmos. Queen of night, there are no medicines or toxins you do not wield. No secrets elude your seekers. No mysteries repel your supplicants. Give unto me, then, Mother, the power of the poison which heals, so that I might extract strength from past pain and injury. I honor the fear. It is my teacher. I will face my fear. I will walk into my fear with gladness and greet it as a friend. For the greater my fear, the greater will be my courage as I break its bonds. Mistress, you have opened the ways to my wanderings. I am holder of the keys to all aesthetics and the whole potential of the void by your grace. As I emerge once more from this season of darkness, clutching my underworld's prize, I am binding my breasts in preparation for battle. My child is a blade of flame. My heart is a name, and I am girded by your sacred light. Hail Hecate. Hail Hecate, indeed. Well, it is happening again. You are listening to the Lux Occult podcast, this time with a special new moon twist. This is, of course, the podcast where we gleefully taunt the mundane, butcher the Latin and most other languages, and also discuss a variety of occult, spiritual, and esoteric or adjacent topics. Exploring the intersections of magic, science, art, philosophy, technology, and so much more through the lens of chaos magic, this is occultism for everyone. I'm your host, Lux Estrada, and if you're hearing the sound of my voice right now, that means that this show, and magic for that matter, are for you if you want them. There are a lot of different ways to be more free in the world, and using magic or making space for a spiritual practice in your life, especially in an accountable way, can be one of them. As always, I don't speak for anybody but myself. People can, will, and should disagree sometimes with the things that I or my guests have to say on this show. How we ever learn anything after all if we were all in agreement on all things at all times. And like those who attempt to be reasonable should be willing to do, I can and often will revise my opinions or thoughts about things based on new evidence or developments. Very excited to share today's conversation with Michael, formerly Cliff, of Enochian Today. You can also check out episodes 20 and 94 of the show to hear Michael and I talking more about Enochian and some of the magical explorations he's done into the celestial realms of the aethers and all of that goes along with that practice. Today we're going to be talking about the power in the name and about Michael's new book, which is called Enochian Magic, an Introductory Guide. We'll discuss how the approach to Enochian laid out in Michael's book is different than those which are informed on or based by the work that the Golden Dawn or others did with the original transmissions from Dee and Kelly. And we'll also talk a little bit about some of the potential risks and rewards for the solo Enochian practitioner. We'll have a little bit of fun at the expense of Dee and Kelly and the whole wife-swapping affair. And also talk a little bit about Michael's work as an astrological consultant, which is actually a service of his, which I've used a few times and have found pretty helpful. Lots of cool stuff to get into in today's conversation. Before we do, let me say real quick that if you like the show or the other work I've been getting into, you can support it on Patreon, and this will entitle you to take a bibliomancy break with me. Patreon supporters can email me a question and I will get back to them with an audio recording of my bibliomancy reading based on the bibliomancy roll tables I've constructed for this. Buy me a coffee is another option for supporting the show if you want to do that with a one-time thing and you don't want to do the whole Patreon rigmarole. Your support, however it comes, including listening, thank you for being here. It makes the show possible by allowing me to cover the expenses associated with making it, which honestly seem to rise every day, but such is life. But this allows me to justify the time that I spend. And although I'm a very introverted person and I don't use like social media very much, it's kind of a lot. I'm not there checking on stuff every day or anything like that. This certainly doesn't mean that I don't want to hear from people or anything like that. I'm beyond lucky to have such amazing listeners and collaborators and cohorts and co-conspirators, etc. I always welcome people's thoughts, questions, comments, suggestions, or arcane revelations. You can reach me at luxoccultpod@gmail.com, or you can find me on Instagram at luxoccultpod, or on Blue Sky at luxestrada919. Very stoked to share my latest conversation with Michael from Enochian today. I'll be back after the interview to do listener mail and shoutouts, and there's also a little bit of an update about the folks we were talking about in the last episode of the show, which is called MAGA Witches and Magic Wars with Michael M. Hughes. But for now, let's get into it. Here's my chat with Michael from Enochian today. All right, well, my guest, once again returning to the show, but with a brand spiffy new name, is Michael. Michael, greetings.
Hey, Luxa, how are you?
I'm doing really well, doing well.
Good, good. Yeah, new name and is sort of the same new me, I guess. I don't know, same old me, sort of new, but it's a little different. So I'm still kind of getting used to being called Michael, but it's been about 7 months now. So
right on.
Yeah.
So maybe we could catch listeners up on the sort of last name that you were using so that they can reference back to those
Sure.
last episodes.
Yeah, I guess that would help.
And also if you wouldn't mind kind of sharing a little bit about your thoughts about, the name and like what kind of journey that was for you.
Yeah, so it's kind of weird for me because I know that my parents actually, this goes all the way back to the beginning, I guess, but my parents were contentious about what name they wanted to give me. My dad, he wanted to name me apparently after a high school choir director of his, who he, I guess, felt a lot of affection for. My mom didn't like the name Clifton, by the way. I suppose I should say that, Clifton or Cliff for short, and then the middle name of Joel, and then of course my dad's last name, as is usual here in the States. But I was, I don't know. I guess the fact that they were arguing about it, my mom didn't really like the name, but I guess my dad won out in that argument. But it didn't really resonate that much to me in terms of like personality. Okay, there's a town near a cliff. I guess I'm ethnically Norwegian, lots of fjords, maybe that's sort of fit, but I just kind of accepted it. You don't really think much about your name. But interestingly, what happened with my mom and her passing, and I'll go ahead and get a little into this and trying to leave out certain details. But basically, she and my dad divorced when I was very young, and she wound up. She was very much into the end times. So I'm one of those, fundamentalist, end times Christian turned occultist people. There's a not uncommon pipeline. For people who are,
yeah. Lots of friends who are actually still, consider themselves Christians and are occultists and stuff, and all kinds of stuff. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. But there is something particular about the openness to things that you're not necessarily seeing, I guess, that goes with that. And then a lot of deconstruction, and then also figuring out, in my case, it was like, what can you actually do that you can prove that is beyond that? And you could go all the way from the scientific, what is energy? You can't prove it, but you turn on a light switch and you do a bunch of math, and then all of a sudden there's conservation of energy there. Anyway, for me, what happened in her case is that she remarried, and she was married to my stepdad for 40 plus years, just over 40 years, and he gets stage 4 cancer. He's diagnosed at stage 4, and he winds up surviving for 2 years. And she's sort of the caretaker and trying to keep the household running and stuff like that. Long story short, and I'll try to keep this focused on just her. She abandons him with 4 months left to live in the care of my younger sister, not telling my younger sister until she had already gone on an RV trip into the state where I live, picked up somebody, moved with him to Colorado, and then lives out there for the next 4 months and until the end of her life. And within 6 days after my stepdad passes away, she marries this guy. And then a year later, not having gotten vaccinated against COVID, she dies of COVID. So you can imagine like all the, and on top
That's,
of that, yeah, on
gosh,
top of
what a
that,
roller
like,
coaster. I'm so
yeah,
sorry. That's so much to
yeah.
have
And on
to cope with and
it
unpack. And
it
geez.
really is, yeah. And on top of that, of course, she puts down the two dogs that she had, just the whole nine
Oh
yards.
my
So
gosh.
it
Sounds
was
really, really hectic and horrible. I'm so
it was
sorry.
horrible, yeah. So I didn't want any part of that as far as that. And my biological dad and I, we're, it's strained. I'll just say that much. He's still alive, but it's strained. And so we're not in any meaningful form of contact. So I decided that I said, screw this. I didn't like the way all that ended. Didn't want to be associated with her. I love my stepdad, but I didn't feel like I wanted to take his name. But the person who's really been in my corner for, the entirety of my marriage has been my wife. So I'm like, let me take her last name. And I've always vibed a lot with the angels. So I did take the first name of Michael, but it also is a parallel to my wife, whose name is Michelle. So that I am glad to like do double duty. She's like, you named yourself after an angel, and I'm like, no, I actually named myself after both. It was nice commonality. And then I took the middle name of Metatron because how many people do you know? There are plenty of Michael Girards, but how many people do you know are going to take the angel Metatron as any one of their names? So
Okay, well, this is
yeah,
at once very cute and also like low-key metal. I love Metatron for you as a middle name.
yeah,
Fuck yeah.
absolutely, right? Nobody else has that name, so
Well,
so
yeah.
the first and last name I was okay. I always kind of joked about people who have like two first names, and of course Gerard is a first name often for folks. But now I've got that, but I don't have three typical first names. I've got just the first and last name, and then so yeah, Michael Metatron Gerard. So it's like okay, I like that. And what's funny about that is getting back to your question about like magical identity. I mean, first, I've always vibed with the angels, but another thing that was interesting to me is like seeing what name also kind of worked out as far as the systems of, converting letters to numbers. So the Hebrew, of course, has gematria, and I wound up doing that calculation, which is basically their numerological system. So I did that calculation and I said, okay, this kind of works in this version. And then let me try the Enochian version. That kind of works. I wanted like basically certain planetary correspondences to work. But of course, also, it worked out very nicely with Enochian in that not only did it work as far as the Enochian numerological significations, but also my name now has 21 letters. So that's 3 times 7. And it also has 7 syllables. And Enochian is all about the number 7. If you know nothing else about Enochian at the end of this podcast, it's very heavily focused on the number 7, which if you go back to the Bible, is 7 days of the week, and the seventh day was set as part of the week to make it holy. So there's a lot of holiness significance to the number 7. So, and it's kind of interesting. It's still kind of interesting to like have to like take on the new name and try to be referred to that way. And it's like, okay, I can kind of deal with this. But I think it was somebody in the green mushroom server said, oh, we have too many Michaels. So I had to laugh at that. But yeah, yeah, I don't mind. I don't mind
That's
taking that
awesome.
name. There's a reason it's a popular name.
Fuck yeah. Well, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And yeah, thank you so much for that context. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, yeah. It was wild, but it wasn't like I was trying to diss anybody, but I haven't really been other than my siblings, I haven't really been had close relationships with extended family, so it all kind of lined up pretty well.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
And sometimes it just makes sense to call yourself something that aligns more with who you feel like you are. I don't know. That
Yeah.
tracks.
Yeah, 100%. It was totally worth the time and effort and finances. It's not a free thing to do, but you really there's something really nice about picking your own name as an adult, especially,
Yeah.
a middle-aged person like myself, when it's like, you know a little bit more about who you are. It's not like I'm really a young person who hasn't figured myself out yet. I kind of know myself by this point, kind
Yeah,
of.
absolutely. And this is, I just want to point out too, because this is like a civil liberty here in the US that's really under threat right now, like the ability of
Mm,
people to choose the name that they want to use and stuff. And
yes.
there's a law that was recently passed in the state of Kansas saying that it's like not legal for people who have like changed their name to a
Mm,
name that has like a name that's associated with the gender that they weren't assigned at birth or the sex they
yeah,
weren't. It's
so
just like this like
ridiculous. Yeah.
really onerous, like draconian fucking authoritarian bullshit. Anyway, I just wanted to kind of point that out and to
No,
like
that's
to point out how cool it is that, that you were able to like do that because not everybody's able to. So yeah.
Yeah, that's really important, and I don't want to let that slide by because, I chose, I went from Clifton, which is usually a boy's name, to Michael, which is usually a boy's name, just in terms of like the statistics, but, you know, it was one of the things that my therapist and I were talking about is just like, she mentioned how she has trans clients and how suddenly they have to like adapt to a new identity. And I think, like whatever reason you have a dysphoria about your name, it really does feel a lot better once you get to the other side of that. So in my case, it was, dysphoria surrounding, the family of origin. And I'm not going to say that it's like comparison in any level to what gender dysphoria is like, because I don't have that, and I don't, I don't experience that. But regardless, I mean, man, that's usually so bad that people are like doing, things to, physically make physical changes so that they feel better about
Mhm.
who they are in their own body. So that's like many, many times whatever I have, at a little level, at my like, family level. So I think it's important for people to recognize just how strong that is, and just a basic right like that to feel better in your own skin. I think that's really important, and I definitely appreciate, like, it's just one of these little things, you get older, a little bit more experience, and you appreciate the larger issue that you kind of intellectually and morally were already on the side of, but now it's like you understand it even, a little bit better. Not to the same
Totally.
degree, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, we all learn a little bit every day, right? If we're
Sure, yeah,
if we're
one
paying
hopes.
attention, I suppose. Yeah.
Exactly.
Right on. Fuck yeah. Well,
Yeah,
you've got a new book out, which is one of the reasons that we're here talking today. Do you want to tell me a little bit about that?
sure. So, surprise, surprise, Michael releases a book on Enochian because,
Shocking.
yeah, shocking. So yeah, I mentioned a little bit in the forward to the book about how I was always kind of interested in Enochian. And by the way, astrologically, I was part of a study about Enochian, and magic in general, that pointed to the signs that I might be interested in Enochian magic. Yeah, when I was many years ago now, when I was 19 years old. I was interested in magic of all kinds, and I knew that I've read that Enochian had this reputation of being very powerful, and ooh, John Dee, and he was, working with Queen Elizabeth I, and I was interested in it. I've read about it, but I couldn't really find much in terms of like, a good starter pack in terms of that. So decades go by. I won't say how many, but a couple decades go by, and I pick up Lon Milo DuQuette's Enochian Vision Magic. And this actually helped ground me a lot. And I'm like, okay, I can kind of see how the tools were made, how this was transmitted. And I did some workings with it in I want to say 2019, no, 2020, 2014 with that, with Enochian. And it was good. I got kind of far, and then, I basically got some pushback from the angels saying, you better stop right now. So I said, okay. And then I picked it back up in 2019. And as I went along, I kept, getting more books on Enochian, like Aaron Leach's work is very good. Scott Stenwick's work is very good. And I went ahead and like tried my best to like figure out more of the system. And since then, I've done a lot of work with it, obviously. And if you go to my blog, Enochian.today, there's a whole bunch of stuff on there, probably too much and more than you could want to deal with. But I went ahead and yeah, as a beginner, that is, maybe it'd be of interest to other folks. But what I found was that as I'm reading through the various different books, what I found, I'm not going to say who did what or where and when, what things that I found wanting, but I found it was a little hard to both get started, find something that was very accurate, find something that gave you a good model, and found something that wasn't already embedded in another system, like, for example, the Thelema approach to Enochian, or which is really to say more of the Golden Dawn style approach. Which is not to say that, I am against innovation. I'm not, for sure. But the original transmission of the materials from John Dee and Edward Kelly, who are the two people without whom we would not have Enochian today, it didn't have the level of extra complexity all the way down to Enochian chess that the Golden Dawn created, which is super complicated, extra bells and whistles. And also they filled in a lot of gaps and they changed various things about it. So instead I said, okay, what can I do to help a new magician who is interested in this? If you've gotten your feet wet in ceremonial magic, I said, well, you need the materials, right? And Lon Milo DuQuette says, you should probably, if you want to, you can create paper materials, but it wasn't accessible in the sense of you can print off the materials. Here's the link, print the material, and how do I do that? There were a lot of like great screen grabs and you could try to, I suppose, blow it up and make it work. But I wanted something where somebody clicks on the link, gets the material. And when I say materials, by the way, let me back up here before I get ahead of myself. So Enochian has a lot of furniture and like a lot of ceremonial magic, a lot of like extra stuff, things, objects that you need to make or create or craft. And what Lon Milo DuQuette says is, for example, I'm wearing an Enochian ring right now, and the specs on it are that it needs to be gold and it needs to have this letter in it and stuff like that. And that's just one of like 20 things in this room right now that are needed to help Enochian work. And the truth is, you technically don't need all of that. You can get started and have some results, but as one of the people who I took an Enochian class from, Jason Louv, says, is that if you try to do it without the extra stuff, the extra bells and whistles, it's sort of like grabbing on to a wire without insulation with an electric current running through it. Yeah, you'll feel something. You might feel a little too much of something, right? So instead, the tools and materials are like putting on that insulation so that you don't get shocked, and instead, whatever it is you're trying to, get the TV work to get the TV to work, let's say. That would be an example of why you would need the materials. Well, there's somewhere between a middle ground between buying, an Enochian ring and buying a table of practice. By the way, those run like $2,000 if you try to get them on Etsy, plus shipping, because they're a lot of work. Somewhere between that, right, is a nice middle ground. And Lon Milo DuQuette says, why don't you try printing out paper versions of this stuff. If you don't have the ring, go ahead and print out make a little, paper ring and, color it in gold and stuff like that. So I liked all of that. And as I was advancing through Enochian, I said, let me just make an Excel spreadsheet version of this stuff that people can just print. And I found myself doing that, and I put it on my website over and over again. And people have liked it, and they've printed stuff off. And I explain, you got to download this font and this other font to get it to print right. But once they do, people are like, oh, okay, now it works. And I can get this paper substitute for whatever it is. And that's a nice thing. It's a nice way to get yourself, it's sort of like putting on floaties in the shallow end of the pool. Don't necessarily try to like do like this massive working, like a nice, 49-day ritual with just that. Eventually, you're supposed to like replace stuff one at a time if you can with the actual physical versions. So, for example, there's a disc, you would make that out of beeswax, and then you could do that. That's sort of the cheapest thing. And then eventually, assuming life it gets better and you have more experience, and let's say you get promoted at your job, eventually you'll be able to either craft or buy some of those materials. So that's kind of the thing, right? Is like I wanted that as an example. I also wanted something that would give people a model of how Enochian works. So I figured, let me give people a sense of like, what's Enochian for? And how does this actually all fit together? And does it fit together? And the answer is yes. And I basically try to orient the reader like, okay, this is really about you becoming, understanding your place in the universe, which is no small thing, by the way. But I explain the kind of the how. And then what I wanted to do is to really make it very easy to get in there and to do, a very small working with any given angel, for example. So I explain how to do that for what I consider the three main parts of the Enochian system, the Heptarchy and the Aethers, and then the Watchtower angels. And I give like little things like that. But then for the experienced people, because I don't want to like leave people, say, this is all stuff I've seen before. I drop little hints here and I say, okay, there may be some Egyptian deities here in this Judeo-Christian, and I do use that term advisedly because this really kind of does have a foot in both regions in terms of like John Dee knew some and was in contact with certain people who were Jewish at the time. And then, of course, he was a very pious Christian. But I do throw in like little hints like, there may be like a little bit more to do with Egyptian religion if you go like way back. And I say, you can use this call to the Aethers that are like these different heavens that you can traverse as, an Enochian practitioner. You could use that same call, and it turns out that you get into like the Platonic forms of a certain word or an idea, and you might be able to do that yourself. And boy, having done a little bit of mushrooms back in the day, it really feels like a mushroom trip if you just put your own name here in this call, and it's like this very psychedelic trip that you get. But you come back down really quickly after it's over, and you're fine. So anyway, I wanted to put in a little bit of something for everybody. So I'm obviously very excited about Enochian, and really what I wanted to do with this is to like lower the barrier to entry that I think a lot of Enochian magicians have felt. And this book does that, but also it gives something to people who are maybe already familiar with Enochian. It does take a bit more of a de-purist approach, but I do really encourage people to elaborate and experiment with the system. So I think there's something in there for everybody.
Very cool. Hell yeah. Well, I feel like I have to follow up on this Enochian chess that you mentioned.
Yeah. So I honestly don't know much about it. It's one of those things. So I just went at length for probably like 5-10 minutes straight about Enochian. So that's just like, and then I wrote a whole book on it. When I have reached the level of this is too complicated for me, that is where I'm at with Enochian chess. I'm like, I don't understand this. I have patience for a lot of stuff, but I could not get into this. It's that complicated. So, but I know that it's something that at least was invented and perhaps played a little bit, but I think it sort of uses this idea of elements and the element of an element. So, for example, fire of fire, air, earth of fire, water of fire, and all of that. But it takes that to the nth degree. I have never actually learned how to play chess. Enochian chess, that is. I know how to play regular chess, but not very well.
All right. Well, right on, listeners. If you know how to play Enochian chess, let me know. I'd be curious to hear
Yeah,
about that. I'm
yeah,
also listening to this. It kind of almost sounds like it might be less of like a game and more of like a type of exercise meant to like get you into a meditative state if it's like that punishingly
sure.
complicated. So
Yeah, it
I
it
think,
it it certainly feels like that. But yeah, I mean, you could do all sorts of path workings, and if you want to have a real magical battle, I think that should be relegated to the lands of Enochian chess. That whoever wins that Enochian chess match, that is the true magician.
I love that. Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a lot of people online that could be using their energy in better ways, like playing Enochian chess. So I guess.
Oh man, could you imagine if we took 1/3 of the people capable of it, or maybe not capable of it, but just told them you need to do this, who
Just
are leaving
try.
like flame comments on Reddit? That would be
Yeah, just
great.
occupy your attention with something else, please.
That's right. That's right.
So you've kind of mentioned a little bit about like what's different about this book than the other materials that are available. I know we spoke a little bit about this actually last night during our Fungal Friday chat, but you had mentioned that you really wanted to put something out there that the solitary practitioner could kind of like get their hands around. And my kind of
Yeah.
question at the time too is like, I'm sure there are kind of both benefits and risks to approaching Enochian as a solitary practitioner. I'm hoping you might be able to speak a little bit about that.
Yeah, for sure. And by the way, I say there's something for everybody. Not everybody will be interested in Enochian, but I will say this much. When I know that I've been a solitary practitioner for most of my life, and that has its pros and cons. On the one hand, you're going to make more mistakes. You're not going to get the insights as much from other people, or if you do, it'll just be, via a book as opposed to the emotional transmission that you can get, and a lot of times the energetic transmission that you can get from somebody else. That said, you get to the longer you are a solitary magician, there are certain things that you get that sort of go without saying. Number one, if you make it to the end, or to whatever phase you're at, no matter what, every step along the way, you're the expert in, right? Because you're the expert in you know what works for you know how to relate things to your life. That the danger there, of course, is that you might, get solipsistic. I'm the master of the universe. You might get a good case of megasitis where you're thinking you're the grand poobah of all things ever. But I think that would be those things are all somewhat heightened when you get into Enochian, because it is a powerful system. I'll use this analogy because why not? There was this MMA fight that I watched. It is a guilty pleasure if it's on TV. I don't go out and seek it, and I certainly don't pay money for it. But I saw this MMA fight, and this guy who was like a very high belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, he does this backflip and catches his opponent, who like decides to walk forward at the time, in a leg lock around his neck, and the guy taps out. And the commentator said, "This is a high risk, high reward move that the guy pulled out." And Enochian is like that. I'd say it's high risk, high investment, but high reward. The downside is that you need to be really careful in terms of like, this is a lot of energy, but you're kind of going to get that anyway. And a group dynamic can lead to groupthink. There are certainly some downsides to groups as well, in terms of, if you get somebody who's very egotistical, especially in a position of power, the whole thing can fragment, and a whole lot of abuses can take place. So what I recommend for folks who might be interested in this, who have their feet wet in ceremonial magic and stuff like that, is kind of the same old advice that I've always given to folks, which is, and tried and true advice, which is, see a therapist, get your own mental house in order. If your own mental house is not in order, and spiritual house is not in order, and by the way, it takes a while to find a therapist who you vibe with, but this is your responsibility now that you're a grown ass person, to get your stuff together, and realize, okay, I need to be responsible for myself, laying a good foundation for your own life before you then to decide to take on the mysteries of the universe, which is not to say that, you can't do both at the same time to some extent. I mean, if you're hungry, if you're, if you need, if you literally need money to pay the rent or feed yourself or your family, obviously doing magic for that is a-okay in my book. I have zero problem with that. I think it's actually recommended. But that being said, getting back to sort of like a Maslow's hierarchy of needs, fix those things first, get yourself your feet on solid ground and keep them on solid ground as you go through your magical practice. Take care of the mental house in order by, doing therapy, meditate, all of that. But yeah, I think there are risks that come with that. With any magical practice. Enochian is supercharged for sure, but that's why I've tried to make sure that I'm in contact with friends, and friends is a big one. You go back to like some of the earliest Buddhist texts, they say that friendship is some of the things that the original Buddha was like very big on, and I recommend that. And that's something that I'm trying to continue my own personal journey on as I, reach my late 40s, is like trying to really make sure that I'm checking in with folks. I'm there for other folks, and other folks are there to help me out, to give me a reality check. And I just got one a couple weeks ago, and it's been the greatest thing ever. So yeah, but I think that will sort of keep you from like getting caught up in the energy of the angels so much that you're not able to realize what it means to be a person. And I think when you're working with Enochian, that's kind of the big lesson that I have for folks, is to approach the angels, to honor them, honor the divine, sure, all of that, but recognize that you're a human being and you need to honor your own humanity. That includes recognizing you're going to make mistakes, recognizing you're going to need to learn and to grow and to fail sometimes. And all of that is okay. That's totally normal. And, if anybody has a problem with that, you know, that's their problem, not yours.
Yeah, fuck yeah. Thank you so much for walking me through that. That makes a lot of sense. I think kind of maybe rephrasing it and maybe looking through it just like a slightly different lens at what you're saying here too is that I'm thinking that especially with Enochian and other types of practices, this is always to some extent the case with magic, but it depends a lot on like what type of thing you're doing. You're going to be entering into a sort of like altered state of consciousness, and like
Yes.
when we're talking about Enochian, this might be for like a sort of a lot of these operations are long and very attention intensive, and you're writing lots of things down all at one time, and so it's I think that like just because of the way the praxis looks, there is that sort of like risk of whatever risks are associated with like prolonged exposure to altered states of consciousness that one would want to be
Yes.
aware of. So, and that this is also probably one of the things that people find so attractive about it too. So it's not like it's necessarily like a bad thing at all. It's just something that, as you said, you really want to be aware of and take care of your meat suit and have your house in order for sure. You want would you invite the angels over to a messy house? You want to clean up your house first.
Oh no, you shouldn't have said that. My house is a mess.
Well, one's a metaphorical
It's
house, I
functional. It's
suppose.
functional. But yeah, yeah. No, that's a really good point. And I think that if you have any tendency towards addiction, or any energy that you're working with, it can be addictive. And by the way, that goes for both positive and uplifting feelings as much as it does for negative stuff. I remember there's this movie, an old movie called, and I hate to think it's old because I remember watching it when it first became available to rent, called The End of the Affair. And Ray Fiennes and Stephen Ray are talking. And Ray Fiennes goes on about, I hate this, I hate you, I hate this other person. And then Stephen Ray says, oh, you're a very good hater. And he says, to hell with both of you, so, but that's the sort of thing, right? Like anger, hate, all of that, it can actually be really addictive. Like, who am I going to be mad at next? And blah, blah, blah. And it's important to be able to step back and recognize I don't need to be in whatever space I'm in right now. I that Being in that thought, being in that train of thoughts or that emotional loop, that is to some extent a choice. And as, grown ass people, we're responsible for, getting our psyche together and recognizing that we have choices regardless of how we got to where we are. We gotta, not everything is going to be like, okay, everything, yeah, in every moment I'm going to be able to do this, that, and the other thing. That's not how it is. But over the course of the long term, things should bend towards being more peaceful, having one's life together, and generally speaking, being an emotionally healthier person as you go along. But yeah, I think one of the things that we can do, there's spiritual bypassing, I think was this phrase by Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, or maybe he wasn't a Rinpoche. I don't think he was, but that's a term. But I think the spiritual escapism for sure is one of these things where we can just, oh well, let's just go to spirit and not have to deal with the fact that I just, squirted a bunch of ketchup on your shirt because you said something I didn't like, That's not, to quote the bard Alanis Morissette, how can you say you're spiritual when you treat people like shit? That's not, that ain't gonna cut it. So that's just my take on it.
Fuck yeah. So where can people find this book?
Yeah, so for right now, I'm selling it through Amazon. It's called Enochian Magic: An Introductory Guide by me, Michael Metatron Girard. And yeah, if you like it, feel free to leave a review. You're not obligated to, but if you have any questions about it, you can certainly reach out to me at enochian.today as usual. I had somebody reach out to me through social media and he was having trouble with this, that, and the other thing. So I helped him out and it was resolved. And the another thing and sometimes it's just a little like, how do I install a font? Well, okay, I'll be your tech support. That's fine. But there is one slight issue where some of the Enochian font isn't rendering. So don't worry. Amazon is on it. They are literally in contact with me about 2 or 3 times a week saying, we're still working on it. We're still working on it. What happened is, what I think is happening is they have this font recognition system. And because Enochian is literally a one-to-one letter cipher, it's taking it and interpreting it and saying, oh, instead of the font that you have, I'm going to switch it back to Arial. So all of these Enochian letters are suddenly being switched back to English letters. And it's like, no, it's supposed to be in
Well,
that other font.
you're taking this like celestial thing and like filtering it through this like demonic filter. So of course it's going to get
Yeah.
translated.
We're
No, I'm
going
just
from we're
joking.
going from the angelic to the mineral, it's never
I
going to
mean,
work
not
out
to
great.
honestly, not to insult the demonic realm because I think it might be much maligned, but
It is, yeah. But yeah, it's not working. So, but they're being very nice and very patient, and they are going to get that fixed. But it won't affect your ability to download the stuff. That's all like I have links straight to my website, so you can go there, you can download it, download the font, and it should render okay. And if not, like I said, reach out. But that's a small issue. The main text of the book is not. I'm just showing pictures just so people get an idea of what it looks like. But it will be fixed. And I'm kind of glad that I waited on getting a paperback version until and because of this sort of issue. It's like if I had just gone ahead and done a paperback version, then all those paperback versions
it would have printed it
would
all
have printed
wrong.
it all
Yeah.
wrong. And then it just was like, ugh, that would be such a headache. So
Self-publishing is so
it
complicated.
really is, and
Yeah.
it's my first time, and I'm like, no, what is this? So, but yeah, I get into the elemental associations that John Dee and Edward Kelly had. I get into the aethers, like I said, and I get into the astrological associations because there's a lot of those that aren't always paid attention to, but they can actually be pretty good if you're into planetary magic or any kind of astrological stuff. If you want to make talismans, stuff like that, I think I have a little bit on there. And I even touch on the Keiko demons, just a little bit, just a little bit. So I do keep it mostly angelic.
Awesome. Well,
Yeah.
I know another thing that you do, and this is a service of which I have availed myself rather,
Hmm.
but is some astrological consultation. I know you recently gave me some very good insights on my solar return, which I appreciated very much. Thank you for that. And
You're welcome.
yeah, so do you want to talk a little bit about what's new, if anything, with that work?
Sure. Yeah. So I went through the arduous process of getting certified, and I think that, you can be a good astrologer without being certified, but certified astrologers tend to be better overall. And so I went through the process. I wanted to sort of prove to myself that I got this. I can meet the standards that are set out by my fellow astrologers. And then going through that process, you come to learn a lot about your own interpretations and how things are calculated and where does all of this come from. And I can certainly explain astrology a lot better. And even, just on a personal note, one of the last things I did was I rectified my late stepfather's natal chart because we never found his birth certificate. So I went ahead and gave what you could say is a highly educated guess about what time of day he was born and based on the events of his life and stuff like that. Now, that's not a service that I offer, and the only reason I don't offer it usually is because it's a very time intensive task. In his case, I could go into why there was actually a signature in his chart as to why his took so long to do. But what I do offer is I offer natal consultations. I can offer consultations regarding career, synastry, relationships, which is synastry is a fancy way of saying, let's put these two charts, overlap them on top of each other and see what's getting lit up by each other's charts and stuff like that. So when it comes to relationships, when it comes to what your chart has to say about you, what your chart has to say about your future or your past, if you're interested in career, relationships, if you're interested in more information about finances, all of those sorts of things, that's the sort of thing that you can ask me about in a consultation. So obviously you can reach me through Enochian.today. I have a separate astrology site called SkyMirror.today, and yeah, I think it's I'm glad I got that one because it's a kind of a metal name, if I do say so myself, So, and that's kind of what astrology is. It's a reflection of what's going on, or you could argue that, we're reflecting what the sky wants, and the sky in some ways is reflecting what's going on in our own lives. And so the whole goal of the consultation is whatever you are interested in. So reach out if you have something specific. I also offer, I haven't done it much, but if you have an object that is lost, there is a service called Horary Astrology where I cast a chart as soon as I get it, and I try to see if I can help you find a lost object or get any divinatory answer to a question that you may have. So, yeah, all of these things are services that I have. So just reach out to me through SkyMirror.today and we'll get the conversation rolling.
Awesome. And I will put a link to that in the show description for people. Fuck yeah.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much.
So we had talked a little bit about this before we started recording, but I was curious, like, what if somebody, because Enochian is kind of a complicated system, like, and when it comes to like pedagogy, different people learn different ways. Like, if somebody were to reach out to you saying, like, look, I would really benefit from, let's say, an hour of instruction one-on-one about Enochian, is that a sort of consultation you might consider providing, or do you provide that type of thing?
I'll consider it. I don't have anything formal set up right now, but if that's something you're interested in, you can absolutely reach out. The easiest way, and I forgot about it when we talked about it, I'm glad you brought it up again, is I do have a lot of videos, free videos on YouTube. Just search Enochian.today, just type that whole thing in and I'll show up. And I do have a playlist and I sort of structured it like university courses. So I have Enochian 101 and 102 and stuff like that. really trying to help people understand where stuff comes from. So this was all just stuff I did on the fly as a public service. So you can definitely use that in conjunction with the book. But yeah, if the videos aren't enough, or if that I left something unclear, or if you just need help kind of like understanding about it, reach out and we can have a discussion. I think I'm open to doing that, but I haven't gotten a lot of people yet. And maybe that's something that I need to structure a class around or something like that to sort of help people work through that. But yeah, the stuff on YouTube, like I said, it's free, and you can go ahead and just watch through some of the earliest videos that I have on it. And I think I have it all in sequential order. So, 101, 102, 103. And I even get into some of the later aethers where, there's a little bit of a hint of sex magic that you can do during an Enochian state in case you are interested in mixing your energies with with, in particular, a couple of the entities that appear and the divine itself, I would argue, when you get to Lil.
Okay.
So, mhm.
Sounds fun and
Yeah.
horny. Fantastic.
I do recommend it.
So before I let you go, I'm curious, is there like a misconception about Enochian or something like that, or sort of like one of those things in like maybe popular
Oh,
culture or bigger
oh
magical
yeah.
culture that like really gets your
Oh
goat?
my God. Okay, yes. So, I have a couple. And
Cool.
this is I'm just gonna like filter down here and
This
just
is like
like
the hater segment of
this
the
is the hater
conversation.
segment. OMG. So, okay, first of all, everybody jumps to the end about the relationship in that initially Enochian transmission between John Dee and Edward Kelly, and they're like, they swapped wives, right?
They
They
did
banged
swap
each other's
wives because the angels told them to, is the
the,
story I heard.
Edward Kelly, he just made it up. He just wanted to get laid. I mean, okay. So the truth is that yes, Edward Kelly did sleep with John Dee's wife, probably fathered a child with her, but John Dee did not actually sleep with Edward Kelly's wife. I mean, I suppose in the literal sense they slept in the same bed. But Jason Louv said that he found the diary where John Dee admits to not actually consummating it, but he found it scratched out. That phrase scratched out, which is to me like, I can just imagine this poor, 50 something guy who's being told by like a guy half his age that,
He got his ear cut off for like being a con man, right?
being maybe possibly forging coins, stuff like that. So, there's definitely a shady side to Edward Kelly. That being said, but the other thing I really have to get on is everybody since the very start of Enochian, every time this happens, I think I refer to it in the book as a tiresomely perennial concern that, oh, they were really in touch with demons the whole time. It was demons the whole time. And it's like, they're evil, they're going to corrupt you, don't get into magic, blah, 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 blah. And look, I get it. It's been a thing with the church for a very long time that no matter what, you're not actually ever dealing with an angel or with God. You better be careful. You better, restrict yourself to this very narrow window of authority. Look, John Dee and Edward Kelly had a very weird, and the Angels would often go back and forth on certain things and like correct a bunch of stuff. And sometimes Edward Kelly would go off and he would do like his own basically version of Goetia back in the day, Goetia, however you pronounce it, and work, semi-demonic stuff on his own. But right away that they would always like come back to the angels and they would have to pray and cleanse themselves spiritually and stuff like that. I actually got into it with somebody who left a comment on one of my videos. There was only one person who was very problematic. There's always one, right? And I pointed. I don't know if I reference this in the book or not, but you have to eventually say, kind of look back to like certain sources of wisdom. And I was raised Christian, and to me, some of the wisdom of what a lot of Jesus said kind of holds up over time. And one of the things he said, he talked about false prophets. And in the King James Version, he says, you'll know them by their fruits, right? And you can make the same argument for spirits, If you're talking with a spirit who's helping you eat better, who's helping you get 8 hours of sleep, who's helping you understand yourself a little bit better, get rid of, stupid negative self-talk, all of that sort of thing. don't say, well, that's an evil spirit because, oh, this spirit, they went ahead and made me healthy and they helped me, feel better about myself and feel like, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, that's not an evil spirit. That's somebody who is, whoever it is, that's someone who is like helping you be a healthier person, and more emotionally stable. So that's the sort of thing that I get into with like, oh my God, they're actually demons, don't ever get into magic. It's part of the whole, boogeyman of like getting people to never get into magic in the first place, especially for people who are raised Christian, but not just that.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
this reminds me of, because I do think there is a lot of like magic in any religion and stuff, but like this reminds me of, I went to a furniture retailer and I was going to buy a lamp there, and there's this like sticker on the lamp and it says, you can only use our brand of light bulbs in this lamp or it like won't work,
What?
right?
Oh,
And I
wow.
was like, it kind of sounds like that, like logic. Like if you
Yeah.
don't use things in our way, if you don't buy the light bulbs or the magic from us, it's like bad and it's not going to work and it's going to screw everything up,
That is a perfect analogy. That is a perfect analogy with a nice little, shiv in the capitalism side to boot. I love that.
Well, I do think capitalism is often one of the boogeymen behind the masks here. So
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. It has its own problems for sure.
Yeah, and where it intersects with religion, I think we see a lot of issues for sure. So
Sure.
yeah.
Yep. But that's a perfect analogy. So, yes, I mean, there were concerns from the very beginning, between Edward Kelly and John Dee. Edward Kelly was certainly shady. John Dee was not a perfect person. They were both human beings, just to get back to that point again. So, I certainly have I would say just, if you're worried about it, if you're worried about that, then I mean, is magic even for you? I mean, I guess you could do sigil work and not have to like involve another entity. You don't have to work with that.
Yeah,
But
there's some people that work purely in like psychological model and don't really kind of,
sure.
or energy models. There's all, like if you're a chaos magician,
Yeah.
there's all kinds of other models to choose from,
Yeah.
and you don't have to think about spooky spirits at all if you don't want
Yeah.
to.
Exactly. Except the people you see, driving down the road, maybe they'll cut you off and you got to watch out for them. So use
Absolutely.
your
Well,
turn signal.
definitely be careful of people, always, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. That's how it goes. But yeah, those would be my two big things. It's like, first of all, the whole wife swapping thing came at the very end of a relatively long relationship. But also, I mean, you can only do so much to convince somebody that this is right. And I do go into it a little bit, I mean, basically when I got to the end of the Aethers, it's like, okay, I'm no longer afraid of death. Oh, because, and I see kind of like, everything's kind of doing the best we're doing the best we can. And, I don't feel as egotistical, that's an egotistical thing to say, but, you kind of realize your place among everything a little bit better, at
You're
least, at
like
least in
less
my case.
invested in your own perspective and more curious
Yeah.
about, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, more integrated. Yeah, for sure. So that if you think that's a bad thing, then okay, don't do Enochian.
Yeah, well, I feel like it's often a waste of time to argue with other people about like
Sure,
ontology in general, so I
sure,
try to
sure.
avoid it.
Absolutely.
But yeah, well, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me. I'm so excited about this new book and everything. And is there anything that you would like to mention that we didn't get the chance to hit on yet?
No, I think we covered it. I mean, I know that for me, I'm branching out a little bit more. I did get in touch with the angel Metatron, and he's guiding me towards working with the Jinn more. So, okay, now I'm a new branch of magic. I got some Buddhist stuff, I got some Jinn magic stuff that I'm working on, and I'm starting to see some interesting parallels. So it's my first foray into Arabic magic, and I'm like, okay, this is all new to me, but I'm enjoying it.
Very cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
interesting stuff for sure. And yeah, lots of cool stuff there. Hell yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm liking it. And yeah, how's your magical practice going?
It's going well.
Yeah.
I had a little bit of like a lull while I was setting up my household and focusing on other things like that.
What? Setting up the foundation. What are you doing?
Well, but it's nice. I've and through that process I planted like a devotional garden with like saffron and garlic and stuff like that,
Oh,
and
I
I'm
love
excited about
that.
that. And
I love that.
so
Yeah.
yeah, just doing some real kind of like deep foundation building work. A lot of protection magic work. I've been working on creating some fun like talismans and stuff. I've been doing some like cut up stuff as well.
Oh,
And
that's awesome.
yeah, my usual devotional practices, and in addition to that, some public stuff that I'm getting set up as well. So yeah, really looking forward to all of that.
That's awesome. That's awesome. That's great. It sounds like you're in a really nice, healthy place. So I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I definitely was a rough patch getting out here and everything. Moving is never fun, and our particular one ended up being a little more complicated than we expected, but I think it turned out really well in the long run. The extra complications really ended up paying out in terms of what shook out. So
Yeah, that's
definitely
great.
feel really grateful, and yeah, thank you.
Well, isn't that what they say at the end of all the Grimm's Brothers fairy tales? All's well that ends well. So,
Indeed, indeed. And another thing I'm really excited about musically and magically is like working more on like my vocal practice and stuff, and kind of incorporating some of the like energy work that I've done with the magician's voice into like singing and stuff, and really having some fun with that shit. So yeah.
that is really great. Yeah, I had 4 years of choir in high school. I loved it,
Oh,
and
cool.
it definitely helped me a lot with all the words you're supposed to vibrate and stuff like that. I knew exactly what they were talking about. So I'm really happy for you. That's great. I'm glad
Thank you.
that you've been doing that. Yeah.
And also for people listening, singing is actually, it can stimulate the vagus nerve. It can actually be a really great way to like cope with stress and get yourself back into like a clear-headed way of thinking. So it's if you're feeling stressed out, just belting out a couple chords of your favorite pop song or whatever can actually have like really powerful and beneficial physiological effects. So fuck yeah.
That's awesome. That's good to know.
Well, thank you so much. Is there any last words that you would like to leave the listeners and I with, or any like advice you'd like to offer us?
No, just hang in there in terms of like when it comes to life or magic, hang in there. Sometimes you need to take a step back, learn to it's okay to have to muddle through sometimes, but that's about it, just enjoy the ride as best you can, and learn to like chill out if you can, and just there'll be more interesting stuff along the way. And you'll look back and laugh at a lot of it. So,
Sometimes chilling out is absolutely the best thing to do. Fuck yeah. Thank you
yeah,
so
yeah.
much.
Thank you. Thank you. I've enjoyed my time as always.
Thank you so much, Michael. I appreciate it.
All right. Take care.
All right, thanks so much to Michael from Enochian today for joining me. Check out the show description for links to his book and the other stuff that we talked about here today. Michael is also going to be leading a few Enochian scrying sessions. I think it's the lowest 3 aethers via Zoom, which will be free with donations welcome. I went to a few of these when he was doing them back in 2022 or 23, and they were really, really cool. You can find them listed on Enochian today, as well as on the Green Machine Discord server, home of the Green Mushroom Project and Void House. Green Mushroom Project, real quick, is an ongoing group magical working based on the metaphor of the relationship that some fungi share with some plants. In a nutshell, if we, the magical practitioners of the project, are like a forest of trees, the green mushroom hyphosigil current is what connects us and strengthens us in unseen ways. In addition to the idea of this kind of chthonic mycelial web underground, there's also the idea of the mushroom's spores, which exist in a more like celestial context. And these are like little packets of the current's energy, which can be applied to situations as needed by any participant. Our newest experiment, Void House, is about investigating the healing and alchemical properties of consent, providing consent education to magically inclined people, and organizing consent-centered magical spaces for group work, both in person and online. We've got lots of fun and free activities going on the Green Machine Discord server, including our weekly Fungal Friday chats, as well as special events like ceremonies and seasonal celebrations, and things like those aether scrying that I mentioned. As always, much love and much love to everybody participating in the Green Mushroom Project, regardless of what that looks like for you and your practice. It's been such an honor and such a privilege to be sharing this journey with you all. You can reach me at luxoccultpod@gmail.com or get me on Blue Sky at luxestrada919 for a link to that Discord server. All right, let's do listener mail and shout outs. And there's also an update here. All right, shout out and thank you to Workers Tap in Portland for hosting our recent ceremony to create community protection salt. And thanks so much to everybody who attended. It was so cool to hang out with some friends and to meet some really rad new local magical people as well. Fuck yeah, I'm really looking forward to putting together another little local event soon, hopefully outside as the weather gets nicer and nicer. Greetings and thank you to Brittany, James, and Brian. Much appreciated for the support. Thanks also to Likes to Read for the following update about what we talked about in the recent episode with Michael M. Hughes, which was called MAGA Witches and Magic Wars, in quotes. In that episode, I mentioned that the YouTube channel with the content we were talking about had recently been deleted. Like, as I was making the episode, it went down. And I predicted that the people who made it likely pivoted to a new, more Christian-looking thing. So I'll read part of Likes to Read's email here, the subject of which I found Griffin and McQuaid's new gig. Okay, so Likes to Read says, "You were spot on. They have a Facebook page as well as the link to this mystery school that they are now running. They pivoted," says Likes to Read, on the page to teaching secret spiritual methods that Jesus taught his disciples. Likes to Read continues, "Only one problem. Jesus's methods were all the way out in the open. He put his teachings on blast to reach as many people as possible. Secrecy wasn't a thing with Jesus. But let's not cloud the issue with facts, not when there's money to be made." Likes to Read says that they've been in Michael's group since the spell was first viral, since March of 2017. So they've been kind of keeping an eye on things. And they comment that Griffin used the conflict mostly to drive engagement to his sites rather than as a group project against the Bind Trump group, as it was named at the time. All right, thanks so much to Likes to Read for that update. Greetings with deep gratitude to everybody supporting the show in whatever manner that takes place. Thank you so much for being here for another journey around the podcasting rink. If you like the show, you can support it on Patreon, which will entitle you to receive a bibliomancy reading from me. Making this thing is, of course, a pretty wild amount of work, especially for just one intrepid podcaster, but it means a lot to me to be able to do it. Thank you so much to the people who are making it possible to make this thing by giving on Patreon or buy me a coffee, and to all the people who are supporting the show by spreading the word. Tell all your friends, allies, and magical associates about it, as well as everybody you meet at the next PTA meeting, bake sale, anarchist collective coffee clutch, or ceremonial potluck you attend. You can also post about it on social media or write a positive review where that's possible. Both of these things are super helpful, so thank you so much to everybody who is doing so already. And yes, don't forget to smash the fucking shit out of the follow button or whatever it is on whatever app you use so that you can be alerted when new episodes arrive. As you can imagine, there's been a few tender hurt feelings over me talking about more political issues in these last couple of episodes, and yeah, if you want to answer the haters' hate with some love for the show, it'd be much appreciated in those comments and rating parts of the app. So thank you. All right, a final shout out and thank you to Patrick for listening, and also for the poke about Claude Cahun. For final thoughts, I thought I would take another little foray into the history of resistance featuring Uncle Claude. I've taken the following biographical notes from the Island of Jersey Heritage Center's website. So this piece is subtitled, "A Two-Person Resistance Campaign Led by Two Artists During the Occupation of Jersey." Claude Cahun was an artist, photographer, and writer, creating some of the most startlingly original and enigmatic photographic images of the 20th century. Cahun is best remembered today for their unique self-portrait photographs in which they would appear as different characters, challenging notions of gender and identity and typical stereotypes about women. This defiance of convention and authority was not limited to art, however, and was characteristic of much of Cahn's life. Around 3 years after Cahun and their partner, Marcel Moore, moved to Jersey in 1937. The island was invaded by German forces and occupied for nearly 5 years. Cahun and Moore wanted to resist the German authorities right from the onset of the occupation because, despite their quiet and uneventful life, they felt compelled to act against the suppression of liberty and freedom. Cahun believed that not all of the German soldiers stationed in Jersey were Nazis, and with some inspiration could be encouraged to overthrow the Nazi regime on the island. So began a 2-person resistance campaign that could have ultimately led to their deaths. Especially courageous, as Cahun had been born into a Jewish family, although did not declare themselves as Jewish as required by German order in 1940. In June of 1942, the occupying forces decreed it illegal to be in a possession of a radio set. Cahun and Moore retained a radio set in their home, however, and used it to listen to BBC broadcasts. Moore had not declared that she was fluent in the German language, and she used this skill to translate news taken from radio broadcasts, and Cahun would convert this into poems and other witty pieces of writing. The words were typed or handwritten onto small sheets of tissue paper, and Moore would sometimes add illustrations. They intended these notes to seem as though they were written by a German officer from within the occupying forces, and they were signed Der Soldat ohne Namen, the soldier with no name. The notes were distributed by Cahun and Moore themselves. They made special trips to St. Helier, where they were able to deposit the notes more easily amongst crowds of people. They would leave the notes in soldiers' coat pockets and on cafe tables. As the occupation went on and tobacco became an increasingly rare commodity, they discovered that by placing notes inside cigarette packets, they were more likely to be picked up and read. Jersey Heritage have a selection of over 50 of Cahun and Moore's original resistance notes within their archive collection, and thanks to them for that nice little summary. You can find a link to that and some pictures of these little notes in the show description. I'm curious, though, what does a practice like the one that Cahun and Moore embarked on look like in our modern times? What types of little resistance notes would you leave in the proverbial cigarette packs? What might this 2-person resistance look like in our own lives and times? In what ways is it similar? In what ways is it different? Curious to hear thoughts about that. If people want to share them, you can find me at luxoccultpod@gmail.com. And as you're thinking about this, I will now share the Green Mushroom Project statement of resistance with you as I remind you all to resist. Resist by maintaining sovereignty of the self. Resist by maintaining love of the self. Resist by maintaining fierce loyalty to love and pleasure. Resist with acts of radical kindness. And focus on the path to better times. Fuck yeah. Thanks so much to Michael from Enochian Today for joining me. Check out the show description to find links to his new book and Enochian Today and all of the other stuff that we talked about. Gratitude as always to Hecate, the Void, and all of Team Unseen. Thank you so much for all of the kind support for the show and my other work. And most of all, thanks so much to you for listening. Much love. Even in dark times, there are many bright lights, so shine on, friends. This is Lux Estrada reminding you to stay strong, guard your mind, and stay fucking curious. Alright, I'm gonna leave you with one of the first sound magic tracks that I made. Let's have a little day for now. Cheers. Delta, Victor, Mike, November, Delta, Romeo, Hotel, Whiskey, Romeo, November, Golf, India, Romeo, Sierra. In shining fire we stand opposing dawn, the falling stars of 1,000 dreamless years. The nights awake and alive with breath, your eyes alight with impossible colors. I've pulled out my rib and given it to myself to create anew that which breaks but is not broken. Lao Tzu wrote that the Tao gives birth to the one gives birth to the two gives birth to the three gives birth to the 10,000 things. Tango, whiskey, Lima, Delta, Victor, Mike, November, Delta, Romeo, Hotel, Whiskey, Romeo, November, Golf, Tango, Romeo, Tango, Romeo, Sierra, Victor. Behold, a perennial prestige, continual revelation, the destruction of birth, cutting through the skin of what is with the scalpel of what will be, the work of the sword of process and its attendant cup. I have made an object of power discovered in another world, and been the petty demiurge to land's birth of the mind. I have died, lived, and caught a glimpse of the elusive reflection of time, but none of it is as great as the mysteries contained in a single drop of ink. Crowley wrote, "With the wand createth he, with the cup preserveth he, with the dagger destroyeth he, with the coin redeemeth he." Is what we build created or discovered? Or are there vast and storied boundaries between these lands? Dreams constructed lucidly from bricks of story and song, in a place where all is reduced to a symbol of itself. Shapes with too many dimensions to carry back from the wilderness of these borderlands. Though we may have caught sight of the beast we stalk, let us not be consumed by this hunt, carving whales from soap to be dissolved in the currents of the years. Let us walk with upward gaze upon these paths, embracing fear as a brother, and wield our weapons wisely, carving out space to iterate. Whiskey, Romeo, November, Golf, Tango, Romeo, Tango, Romeo, Sierra, Victor, Bravo. Whiskey, November, Lima, Whiskey, Sierra, Foxtrot, Romeo.
Lux Occult is part of the Green Mushroom Podcast Network.